Now I'm going to turn it over to Lauren Solano. Lauren will be moderating this panel. She is the founder and CEO of Propel Careers, which is a top recruiter of life sciences talent. And Lauren's also the vice chair of MassBioEd's board of directors. So Lauren, with that, I will turn this over to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Carla. So I know a lot of you here, the idea of building talent pipelines, the idea of really trying to engage the best talent is critically important for the success of our industry. And so I'm excited to have today Julie, Keith, Michael, and Bennett to share their thoughts, their insights around this emerging important topic. And so I've got targeted questions to be able to ask each person to be able to focus on a range of different considerations that we should be thinking about with respect to the immigration side. And so I want to start off by just kind of diving in. And so on the first day of the panel, the panelists talked a lot about building talent pipelines, about how important students and recent graduates are to making our workforce competitive and enabling us to develop novel therapeutics. And so Keith, I wanted to have you talk a little bit about, are there potential issues around CPT or OPT for new grads, or maybe STEM extension issues that we need to be thinking about or trying to prepare for that might impact our ability to build the talent pipeline for the workforce?
Yeah, so thanks. So, hi everyone, I'm Keith Pabian. So nice to see you, and thank you so much for having me. So to answer your question, and I'm gonna leave it to Bennett to talk about some of the more legislative issues that might be coming down. But there's a few things to talk about in terms of just things to know about CPT and OPT in general, outside of any sort of immigration change. So the first one is, this is the first year where the H-1B cap process changed, which is the H-1B is, I'm sure most of you know, is the most common type of employment-based immigration visa. With that, there are a couple of things where the filing process changed. So if you're a company that's looking to sponsor a foreign national that's currently on CPT and OPT, you need to be careful to make sure that the petition is filed if they get accepted in the lottery before the OPT status expires. And otherwise, they're not going to be able to use that cap gap, that authorization to work after their OPT expires. Another thing that I'm a little bit worried about, I'm sure we're going to get into this in terms of government processing times, is, again, if you've filed for someone who has OPT and was chosen in the H-1B lottery, if the petition isn't approved by October 1st, you might need to put them on unpaid leave if their OPT time has run out. That leads into, just in terms of the STEM extensions, especially going forward, it seems like your industry, especially on that last presentation, hasn't been hit as hard as some other industries, which is wonderful. But it just really reiterates the benefit to sponsoring people early on in their OPT time and not waiting until they're in their last year of OPT to sponsor them. One issue that we saw that hopefully gets cleaned up a little bit in terms of CPT is some schools were issuing too much time, according to the government, and that caused this assertion from U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is the agency that adjudicates visas, to say that they were actually out of status, even though they were technically still under their approved time. Hopefully that is now cleaned up a little bit, but that was something that we saw this past year where foreign nationals had to return to their home country to get their H-1B visa issued to them. Otherwise, OPT and CPT and the STEM extension, good for now. I'm sure Bennett's going to talk about that momentarily. But just in general, making sure that your foreign nationals understand what they have to do. Also, for companies that have people working for them, make sure that you follow what you put into that STEM plan that they file with the school, because we are also hearing from the government, that you might start seeing some site visits. That was one of the initiatives that came out a few months ago. If you have people working for you on F1 OPT. So that is a lot, but that's essentially, overall things are in pretty good shape for the moment.
Awesome. Keith, thank you so much. I mean, you raised a lot of good points, and it's critical to be able to have the academic world work closely with industry to make sure that we're communicating and trying to work on these. And so Bennett, to dive a little bit deeper on this also, I mean, a lot of people come here on F1 visas to pursue education, and then of course the hope is to bring them in to the workforce. Can you comment on any issues that may be created by a potential limit on entry for people with F1, or other things that we just need to be thinking about with respect to this?
Sure, thank you. Hi, Bennett Savitz, and happy to be with all of you today. So let me make 3 initial points on some issues with F1 entries and visas for people who are needing to enter the US in order to either study or to start work on their practical training. So the first issue is an issue for all visa issuance, and that is that consulates have been closed since the pandemic started in March, and now there are plans to reopen starting this month. But of course, as the reopening happens and as things get scheduled, we are still waiting to see how easy it is going to be to get an appointment for a visa. So the restrictions we expect to last for a long time, and the difficulty in getting a visa at all is expected to last for a long time. So the first and primary concern is that if you can't get a visa, you can't enter, and that's unfortunately pretty much the end of that story. The second issue is that even if you can get a visa, then there are travel restrictions that people have to be aware of. And so there are travel restrictions that are bans for certain individuals from certain countries from entering the US. Some are COVID related and some are now politically based. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But basically, if there are travel restrictions, then even if you have the visa in your passport, you have to know whether you're going to be able to use that visa to enter the US. So whether you're restricted from entering because of the citizenship you have, or whether you're restricted for entering for a certain period of time because of certain countries that you've been in or visited. And in some cases, you might have to try to make your way to a third country that doesn't have those restrictions that allows you to enter the US because you're coming otherwise from a country that can't enter the US if you've been there within the last, let's say, 14 days, for example. And then the third point that I should make, which is kind of the thing hanging over all of our heads with a lot of these issues we're going to talk about, and that is what we expect to be an upcoming presidential proclamation that we expect to happen this month. So last month, there was a proclamation that many of you know came out that talked about limiting immigrant visa issuances. And quite frankly, that proclamation was not that big of a deal because the immigrant visa ban that was put in place coincided with the embassies all being closed and not giving appointments to people anyways. Now that embassies are reopening for business, any kind of ban or moratorium on getting visas is now going to be more real and have worse implications. So if the embassies are open, and if you can travel with a travel restriction, either getting around it somehow or not having a travel restriction, if there's a presidential proclamation that limits certain categories of people from coming in, then those first 2 things aren't going to matter, because then you're still not going to be able to come in during whatever ban or moratorium is put in place. And we, again, expect that to happen at some point this month. We don't know what the details of that are yet, but as soon as that's published, we expect to see some bans. There was, as some of you might have seen, a very small ban put in place for some certain Chinese graduate students doing certain types of research. That was not the proclamation that we were expecting in terms of the bigger one for many more temporary categories. So we still expect that to come at some point this month.
Bennett, thank you so much. You raise a lot of just really important things that we need to be aware of, and especially as we think about how this may impact the workforce over the next couple of years. So my next question is going to be for Julie Galvin. And one of the great things about having Bennett, Keith, and Julie on this panel is that all of them work with a number of different types of companies. So they have seen a lot of different perspectives around how this is impacting ability for the organizations to get talent and develop talent. And so, Julia, I wanted to have you comment a little bit on how inconsistent the timing has been for visa approvals, which then creates uncertainty around planning for trying to hire people and bringing them on board when some of the projects that we're doing are very time sensitive in the life sciences sector.
Sure, absolutely. First, I'm Julie Galvin from Chin & Curtis, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk today, so thank you all. That is one of the biggest issues I think I'm seeing as far as advising clients is it's just the inconsistency, and as Bennett had said as well, just the uncertainty of what we're seeing. I think this was going to be a question down the line, but I think it makes sense to talk about it here as well, because we have had some positive news where premium processing has been reinstated, or it's about to be reinstated, and it's being phased in over the month of June. So that's going to help a bit as far as planning purposes. But before that, we were seeing cases, H-1B transfers could take, I think, premium processing time on the website reflected anywhere from 2 months to 4 months or more. In reality, we were getting approvals within 3 weeks, which was unheard of and really great. But we're also seeing cases take as long as, say, 8 months or so. I recently had somebody that was running up to the very end. When you file an extension on time, you can get 240 days of employment authorization, and she really got her case approved with like 3 days to spare. Also, with H-1B transfers, the employee is allowed to start with the new company upon the receipt notice, so once the case is filed. But receipt notices have been delayed as well, and we're seeing that take something that normally would take a week, maybe 2 at most, 3 or 4 weeks. And when you premium process it, you generally would get an emailed response within 1 or 2 days, and so that really helped as far as planning. So I think the big thing is to look at the big picture and to be flexible. And to know, I know you want the person now, and obviously in an ideal world, that's what everyone wants, but sometimes we have to look at, okay, is this something that's worth waiting for? And in most cases, if it's the right candidate, it really is. And so sometimes we just have to be patient and wait. That being said, now that we have premium processing coming back, that's going to help a bit with the processing times. So as far as June 8th, we're going to be able to start premium processing any cases that were pending. Institutions that are exempt from the cap for the H-1B quota and don't have to go into the lottery, such as universities, affiliated institution, nonprofit research. So that might help a lot of biotech companies can start premium processing on June 15th, and then all the rest on June 22nd. So that will help. Now, that being said, another issue that happens is we're getting requests for evidence on a lot of cases, and they're up about 60% across the board. So even if you have the 2 week for premium processing, if you get a request for evidence, that's going to, that will add several weeks to the process. So that also can leave a little bit of uncertainty. So again, be flexible and file as early as you can so that you can at least get the case in process, and keep your fingers crossed and hope for one of those 3 weeks approvals.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks for all the details around timing. Because I mean, with all of this, things are moving so quickly, things are changing so quickly. So it's so important for everyone to be aware of all the nuances of this. Thank you.
Sure.
So Mike Palladino at BlueRock Therapeutics is the person on the panel that is actually in one of the life sciences companies that's actively hiring talent, actively interacting with a range of considerations with respect to building the pool of people. And so, Mike, I wanted to have you talk a little bit about, can you comment on how the pandemic is causing hiring challenges, or just maybe other considerations to think about with respect to hiring specifically specialized talent? I mean, a lot of the talent that we have in life sciences has these unique skill sets, and we want to draw people that are the best from wherever they might be. And so we'd love to hear a little bit of your thoughts on how you're addressing and dealing with this.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lauren. Thank you for inviting me to join all of you today. My name is Mike Palladino. I'm a Senior Vice President of Legal, Human Resources, and Corporate Communications at a company called BlueRock Therapeutics based in Cambridge. But by way of context, we have R&D sites located in Toronto and New York as well. So we have some complexities to our organization in terms of how we operate, where we hire talent, and how our functions are aligned. And first and foremost, I must say it's great to be in the company of a number of immigration lawyers. I expect to get multiple bills after this for all the good advice you're providing me, so thank you. You know, Blue Rock is, as you well put, Lauren, we're a specialized biotech company. We work in cell and gene therapy. It's a growing field for sure, but the pool of talent is a limited pool. You know, in some cases, we have certain functions on our scientific, medical device or manufacturing functions where there are literally just a handful of people in the world who can do that particular aspect of that function. So for us, there are really three things that we're thinking about right now in terms of how we adapt to COVID and continue to scale as a company, because we are hiring heavily. And fortunately, we've been really successful over the last couple of months with scaling. And I think there's some operational aspects to the recruitment process that have been helpful to us. But there really are three things that we think about. And first and foremost, I think it's just availability of the talent. Where is the talent? How do you reach that talent? Do you use outside resources for that? Do you use internal recruiters? How do you leverage networks among your specialized professionals? Number two, it's you know, accessibility, know where and when to find them, and be able to leverage those occasions where people become available. And we have had some fortunate circumstances for us where talent may be mobile because of the situation with their current employer. And I think third is the mobility piece. Let me just share three specific examples that we've run into recently. One is with a German national who was here and beginning the green card process. But when COVID started, he was in New York with a young child and a wife and no friends and family in New York. And so the idea of his staying here for a long term through the pandemic reaching New York was really unsatisfactory to him. So they returned to Germany. Now the challenge is getting him back with the travel bans and going through the phases of re-entering our foreign-born workforce. We have certain members of our workforce that we actually want to relocate to Canada because we have a pretty sizable organization based in Toronto. And then in some of those cases, we have individuals who are actually foreign-born nationals, so they're not Americans, and they're trying to establish their visa status in Canada. So both the practical and the immigration circumstances are certainly impacting us. And then just the mobility between sites as we access new employees. I do think we're fortunate in some ways that we can heavily rely on O visas and OPT visas and F visas. I think my longer term concern is about the OPT visas and the availability of them and whether that becomes a broader political concern because they are important to us as we build our pipeline of talent from education. So a lot of concerns for us, but I think the way we've handled it is being able to leverage a lot of the talent that we have on this call to be able to help us work through our options. So we're not artificially limiting the pool of already limited talent.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Mike. I know it's so important to be able to kind of think about how do you mitigate that risk around hiring? What are the different scenarios? How do you really plan? Because it's critical then, so that way you've got optionality.
Yep.
Excellent. Good. I want to touch on a few more topics, and then I'm going to ask the panel all to share some thoughts on rumors people have been talking about or hearing, just to dispel hopefully some of them and to I think make a really engaging conversation. But my next question is for Keith around even the consideration of like transfers of visas for people who have been laid off. Can you share a little bit about things companies should be aware of or anything affecting potential issues around that?
Yeah, so it's funny when we did a prep call as a panel last week, and when we did, premium processing, the expedited processing wasn't there. And so that definitely has changed my answer over what I would have said a week ago. Because right now it's so much more feasible to make this work. I had two thoughts leading into this question. So number one is for the organizations and companies on listening to this, just be really careful, because one of the big things that we've encountered over the last several months is that prior to COVID, I think furlough was kind of a made up term. And I think now it's very much a very real thing. But in the immigration regulations, the government essentially considers a furlough like a layoff. So just be really careful that you see that as a separation, even if you have every intention in the world of bringing people back. It's definitely a big immigration event, and you need to make sure that you're talking to your organization's counsel to make sure you don't mess that up. For the employees that get laid off, and hopefully that isn't the case with most of you, you have a 60-day grace period, and the 60-day grace period is still relatively new. It's only a few years old. It applies to multiple visa types, not just H-1Bs, including O's and some others. And what that means is that even if you are laid off or fired or whatever the reason might be, you're allowed to stay in the United States for 60 days after your last date of employment. The government really intended for this to be actual work, not like the date of your severance pay. And during that 60-day period, you can certainly be looking for jobs. And the company that's looking to bring you on can file the petition during that 60-day window. The challenge right now, I think, for most people is 60 days in some industries is more, feels like more time than in others, to find a new job. And then if they can't find a job, the ability to get home right now might also be an issue. And my biggest advice there is the immigration laws have not changed despite the limitations on people going home. The government has not made it easy. So if you're a foreign national and you can't get a new job in that 60-day period and have your employer filed during that 60-day grace period, just make sure you're really watching out for yourself and filing to change your status to tourist visa status to make sure that you maintain your legal status to provide you more opportunities in the future.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Keith. Yeah, it's tough, right? Because sometimes the hiring process takes a couple weeks at least, because there's different rounds and different ways. And so it's just, it's something for us to think about of, could there be ways to streamline some of these to make sure that we're not inadvertently creating issues for people that have been furloughed?
Well, just remember too, the company has to have the labor certification application that's certified to file. So, it adds in a little bit of extra time into that 60-day period. It's really more like a month and a half in reality to find a job. So it's fast.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, I guess on a positive note, I think the summertime will be a little more active than most summers. So if any of you on this panel right now are in that job seeking mode, hopefully you'll find some more opportunities. And so Bennett, I wanted to ask you a little bit to continue with the kind of compliance focus. So do you have like thoughts you could share, or just things for organizations to think about around any issues affecting potential Department of Labor compliance that companies need to be aware of for if the location of an employee changes, if they're currently on a visa, now that we're working from home, if people live in different states from where their office is, or if other things are happening that might create some tension?
Yeah, so unlike the Immigration Service, as Keith mentioned, who have not really been very flexible or helpful for the most part, the Department of Labor has been trying to be more flexible and helpful. And to that point, they've actually published frequently asked questions to try to clarify what employers can do to comply with the Department of Labor regulations during COVID. And in fact, just yesterday, they published a fourth round of frequently asked questions. You can find all of them on their website. Unfortunately, the fourth round of frequently asked questions isn't as helpful as the first three, because it said how they're not going to extend the flexibility and deadline extensions that they had offered to do when this first started. So unfortunately, some of those extensions and some of that flexibility is going to go away. But in terms of complying with the Department of Labor during these times, I would make 3 points that are really important for employers and individual employees to keep in mind. Number one is, all of this is location specific. So if you have an H-1B, for example, that has an underlying labor condition application, that is location specific, meaning it's tied to the work site, and the employer had to have a certification approved for that work site prior to filing the H-1B, and therefore that approval only covers the work sites listed in those applications. So if you're going to change a location, you cannot do that without finding out what the requirements are and complying with those requirements. At a minimum, you're probably going to be looking at having to post something to enable to effectuate the ability to make that move. And in some cases, a posting is enough. Now, of course, in some cases, posting at the office of a place where somebody is working is going to be a problem if the office is closed and people are not there. So there are provisions for electronic postings as well as physical postings. So you have to look at that and comply with whatever the posting options are that you can use. And then the third thing you have to look at is, in certain cases, if you're moving to a location that can't be effectuated simply by a new posting, you are going to have to file a new labor condition application and an amended H-1B petition to allow that to happen. And in fact, the person isn't going to be allowed to start working at the new location until that filing of that labor condition application and that amended H-1B petition is done. There are some exceptions for short-term placements. Sometimes you can get up to 30 days to work at a new location before you have to make those filings, but the rules are very specific. And because the wage that's required to be paid is tied to all of these location rules, the employers especially have to be very careful, because they could be in violation of the wage rules and get into a lot of trouble if they don't comply. So the bottom line is, before you make any changes to what was approved originally, you're going to have to make sure that you follow whatever the rules are to comply with either a new posting or an amended filing.
Awesome. Thank you, Bennett. And, I'm hoping those of you that are listening, I'm hoping you're not getting, scared by all of these things that we're talking about. But, when we were organizing this panel, we wanted to make sure we were covering a range of topics, because it really is complicated, and trying to make sure that people are paying attention, that they're seeking good counsel, hopefully could help mitigate any issues that may come up. Thank you, Bennett. And so, Mike or Julie, do either of you have any comments that you want to share with respect to some of the things that Keith or Bennett just shared, or things that you've seen to build off of that?
I'd like to jump in on the furlough. I think Keith brings up a really important point, that a lot of companies don't realize that H-1B workers particularly can't be furloughed. And while they may be trying to help out the employee by saying, you're still be an employee, we're going to keep you on, but we can't pay you during this time. Unfortunately, the H-1B provisions have something that prohibits what's called benching. So you can't just not pay somebody for non-productive time. And because of that labor condition application that Bennett was just referring to, the company is bound to those wage obligations. And a lot of times companies don't think this through. They're making business decisions and they decide they're going to furlough or even put people down to part-time without talking to immigration counsel. And then it comes to us and we realize this has to be done. You have to file an amended petition, or you have to terminate the person and withdraw the H-1B, or else you have to pay them. And so I think it's important to understand all of these ramifications before you make the business decisions, because otherwise then you could be paying a whole lot of money in legal fees, petition filing fees to USCIS that might, counterbalance with the savings you were going to use with that furlough or with the part-time employee. So that was a great point to make.
And then also, let me just chime in really quickly, because it applies not only to furloughs, but also to wage reductions, which we are seeing with a lot of clients as well. And so the prescribed wages that Julie just talked about apply not just to the furlough issue, but also to reducing wages of H-1B workers.
Yeah, thank you, Bennett, because I know a number of companies have done either across the board wage reduction, or it changes depending upon level of seniority. Okay.
Yeah, and if I could add, I know we've been discussing, in the last topic a lot about furloughs. If I could go back to the hiring aspect of things, or even just the existing employees that many of you have. Look, I would say just probably the best advice that I've seen out of counsel is actually a little less on the technical side. It's more about the engagement side, which is to understand that both applicants and employees have a lot to consider and are often very worried very concerned about their well-being, in many instances, concerned about their family's well-being. Think about whether, if you were in a circumstance whether you didn't know, if you didn't know in the next 60 days whether you could still be in this country, or if you needed to move, what needed to go into that. So there's so many surrounding circumstances that sensitivity and empathy, working with people who may be subject to the laws that we're talking about here that are consistently in flux. And again, thankfully we have some good advisors here, that communication is really important so you can talk about all of the options and set expectations. I think one of the things that's been eye-opening to me recently is our company is an independently operated subsidiary of Bayer. So at some level, I'm part of an international company, and there's a lot of inherent mobility in a company like that. What recently occurred, and actually Julie's partner, Chin and Curtis, mentioned this to me conversation the other day, was that we lose sight of the fact that actually a lot of countries don't want American people located in the US traveling outside of the US. We've been so focused on those coming in, but because we've been the heart of the pandemic here in the US, we're going to be stuck with a limited mobility for people that are located here. So I think there are multiple layers of challenges that come with COVID, and why it's so important we move forward with innovation in vaccines and treatments.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike, for sharing. And so we have a few minutes left of the formal panel. So I want to get into some topics around rumors, because this also was brought up in our prep call, because there's lots of news circulating. There's lots of just things people are saying, and not all of it is actually correct. And so I don't know who would love to start with respect to, trying to demystify some of the rumors that are floating around about these topics.
I can get us going. I'm hearing everything. That's kind of, I think, a good place to start. It seems as though this is all. I'll set the tone for, or I'll set the scene for Bennett and Julie. This is all stemming out of in the first executive order from President Trump in late April, I believe. It was in response to that tweet that he did at about 10:15 at night, saying that they were going to suspend all immigration. In the days after, they walked back significantly to have a very small effect on a very few amount of people. But in the executive order that came out, in addition to scaring many people in terms of what it really was going to mean, it instructed the agencies to come back with recommendations. And that started an avalanche, what felt like for at least for me, an avalanche of people that had a lot of opinions on changes, especially from the far right. And in the last few weeks, last month, everything has been at play, whether it's been H-1Bs, J-1s, OPT, CPT. Basically, I even heard O's and L's, which you never hear that come up in potential reform. From my side, and then I'll turn it over to hear what I'm always so curious to hear what others say. It seems like right now they've backed off a little bit, and from H-1Bs and some of the more standard work visas, and it seems to me like they're focusing a lot on OPT and CPT and J-1s. Although in the last couple of weeks I've seen the universities and colleges really step up with their lobbying efforts, and I'm curious to see what that's gonna do. So I'm curious to hear what Julie and Bennett also have to say on this.
So I'll chime in with one specific point and then one more general point. So specifically, what we're hearing is that there's really an internal struggle right now in the administration, and in fact, you can see that there have been letters sent from various groups of senators. And not necessarily within the party lines that you would expect. Some senators supporting OPT and H-1B and other non-immigrant workers, and then other groups of senators wanting to restrict everything. And so there seems to be an internal struggle even within this administration and the party in terms of how much they want to push these restrictions. And so I think that's why we're seeing the delay in the next proclamation, because they're trying to figure out what they want to do. And then of course they have to figure out what's legal for them to do if they want to do it. And then that brings me to my more general point, which is that, you know, this administration didn't like immigrants before COVID-19, and so this hasn't changed anything. So the restrictions that they're putting in place are by and large ways to get them to be able to have the kinds of restrictions that they wanted before, but to be able to do it more easily and with the excuse of COVID-19. And so in terms of what's going to happen in the future, what's going to happen with immigration restrictions is going to be far more related to what happens in the November election than what happens with COVID-19. If President Trump gets reelected, the immigration restrictions will continue and they'll get worse. And so then COVID-19 really won't be the issue for immigration going forward at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in on and piggyback off of what Bennett said. I think we have to remember that despite that tweet that I read in the middle of the night when I got a text from my friend saying, oh, Julie's job just got interesting. It really is a lot of instilling fear in people, but also it is, I think, there's a huge political push, and there has been from the beginning, as Bennett pointed out. There's been on the regulatory agenda for this administration, pretty much for the entire administration, we've been hearing the H-4 EAD program is going to go away. OPT and STEM OPT especially could be taken off the table. My thought is this isn't just my speculation, this is just a way for the administration to stir up the base, while maybe then they try to put these regulatory efforts in process. That takes a lot of time, there's comment periods, it could take longer, but this could give the administration the excuse, if he can get these regulations at least in the works before the election, that might stir up his base a bit. And hopefully, because we have to go through certain processes in order to promulgate new regulations, they may or may not go into effect. And then if we do have an election, that, as Bennett said, that is going to be crucial in determining what happens in the future.
Cool. Mike, anything to add to these wonderful insights?
We're just hoping for more clarity. And I think we're all looking for a lot more clarity in the world right now. For us, what we're trying to do is not, I think as a company, as we think about changes in potential rules, regulations, laws in the immigration front, I think what we're trying to do is maintain our focus on our scale, because the companies that are most successful coming out of global events like this, or even local events like this, are the ones that commit themselves to innovation. And we don't want to limit ourselves in any way. So we're going to try to continue to be as creative as we can to leverage the talent that we have both locally and internationally. I think that's the best way to be able to survive and thrive, especially in the biotech sphere. What would be helpful for us, though, is the clarity around I do get concerned at times that while borders may open up and travel may open up, what actually is a practical perspective happens at those borders when people arrive there, and the challenges that they're going to have with their mobility coming in and out of countries. And we're no exception. So it's just the unknown. Again, it comes back to the practical unknown. Even if your documentation is ordered and approved, what's the next step to actually practically stepping foot into the country? Those sorts of things concern me going forward.
Yeah. I mean, it makes it hard for all of us to plan. I mean, so I want to, Julie, Keith, Mike, and Bennett, you guys are awesome in terms of insights. We covered a lot in a relatively short time. So I know Carla has a number of questions that people have been asking. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Carla, to be able to address some of those with the panel.